The morning air bit like steel against the skin, sharp and unforgiving. Beyond the frost-rimmed windows of Arendor's royal keep, the world lay buried beneath a heavy quilt of snow. The kingdom of Arendor, proud and cold as its winters, stirred awake to the sound of hooves crunching through ice in the courtyard below. Horses snorted clouds of steam, their harnesses jingling faintly, while servants hurried about with cloaks pulled tight against the chill. Inside the stone chamber, Prince Kael stood rigid as his attendants fastened the last clasps of his doublet. The garment was of deep navy wool, embroidered with silver threads that caught the pale light of dawn. His breath misted faintly in the cold room, though the hearth fire roared behind him. He had always thought the castle walls too wide, too drafty, built for war, not comfort. "Hold still, my lord," murmured Aldrich, his oldest attendant, tugging at the leather belt that cinched Kael's waist. "The council expects you in the hall within the hour." Kael's jaw tightened. The council, the marriage, the peace that felt more like surrender. He had been raised on tales of Velmora's treachery, of their silken words and poisoned daggers, and now he was to wed their princess. He turned slightly, catching his reflection in the polished steel mirror propped against the wall. A soldier's face stared back, sharp cheekbones, dark hair falling just above his brow, eyes the color of storm clouds.
Kael felt the weight of chains. Outside, the bells tolled across the snowy city, echoing through narrow streets lined with timbered houses. Merchants were already sweeping snow from their thresholds, children chasing each other with laughter that rose like sparks against the frozen air. The kingdom lived, breathed, endured, yet all of it balanced on the fragile promise of peace. "Your cloak, sire," another attendant offered, draping heavy fur across his shoulders. The scent of pine and smoke clung to it. Kael pulled it tighter, as though bracing himself against more than the cold. From the courtyard below, a trumpet sounded. The horses were ready, their hooves restless against the cobblestones. Soon, Kael would ride through the snow-laden streets toward the great hall, where envoys from Velmora awaited. Soon, he would meet the woman fate had chosen for him, Princess Elira, the daughter of his enemy. Kael exhaled slowly, the breath curling like smoke.
The forest of Velmora stretched wide and white beneath the pale morning sun, its branches heavy with snow. The silence was broken only by the crunch of hooves and the soft hiss of arrows slicing through the air. Princess Elira sat tall upon her chestnut mare, her silver-blonde hair spilling like threads of light against the fur lining her cloak. Her icy blue eyes narrowed as she drew the bowstring back, breath steady, lips parted just enough to release the arrow. It struck true, piercing the target set against the frozen pines. Hunting had always been her escape, an act of control in a world where her choices were often made for her. The cold air kissed her fair skin, the wind tugged at her gown beneath the riding leathers, and for a moment she felt free, untethered from duty. Yet freedom was fleeting. A rider approached, the royal crest of Velmora gleaming on his breastplate. "Your Highness," he called, bowing his head. "The king summons you. Preparations must begin. The hour of departure draws near." Elira's fingers tightened around the reins. She had known this day would come, yet hearing it aloud felt like a blade pressed against her heart. To leave Velmora, to ride into Arendor's cold embrace, to marry a prince she had been taught to despise, it was a fate she had not chosen. By the time she returned to the royal hall, the hunt already felt like a memory fading into snow. Servants moved swiftly, dressing her in the ceremonial gown chosen for the journey. Icy blue silk trimmed with white fur, the colors of Velmora's winter skies. The fabric clung to her hourglass figure, flowing like water as she walked, the weight of jewels pressing against her collarbone.
Her lips, full and bow-shaped,
were painted the faintest rose, a contrast to the frost in her gaze. She sat upon the carved throne of the hall, the vast chamber echoing with the shuffle of courtiers and the distant toll of bells. Her mind, however, was elsewhere. She thought of the hunt, of the arrow flying true, of the freedom she had tasted for a heartbeat. She thought of the man she was to wed, Kael of Arendor, a name heavy with steel and shadow. Will he see me as a pawn, or as a woman? She wondered, her thoughts sharp as the arrows she carried. Will he despise me as I despise him, or will fate twist our hatred into something else? The hall grew quiet as her father, the king of Velmora, entered. His voice carried the weight of command, but Elira barely heard the words. Her mind remained locked in its own battle, torn between duty and defiance, between the huntress she longed to remain and the bride she was forced to become. And so she sat, regal and radiant in her icy gown, waiting for the journey that would bind her to her enemy, and perhaps, unknowingly, to her destiny.
The hall of Velmora was a blaze of light and ceremony, its vaulted ceilings glittering with chandeliers, its marble floors echoing with the shuffle of courtiers. Kael entered with the weight of Arendor's pride on his shoulders, his cloak trailing behind him like a shadow. The air was thick with expectation, the kind that pressed against the chest and demanded composure. And then he saw her. Princess Elira stood at the far end of the chamber, radiant in icy blue and white silk that shimmered like frost beneath firelight. Her silver blonde hair cascaded in waves, her eyes glacial and unyielding. She was beautiful, undeniably so, but her beauty carried the sharpness of a blade. Kael's gaze swept from head to toe, taking in the delicate bow of her lips, the proud tilt of her chin, the hourglass figure accentuated by the gown. She was every inch the daughter of Velmora, regal and untouchable. Protocol demanded he approach. Protocol demanded he bow. Protocol demanded he take her hand. Kael's jaw
tightened as he bent, his lips brushing the back of her delicate hand. The gesture was meant to seal respect, but her reaction was anything but welcoming. Elira's fingers stiffened in his grasp, her icy eyes narrowing with disgust, as though the touch itself were an offense.
Frustration flared in him, mingled with a dark amusement. So this is the woman I am to wed, he thought, straightening, his storm-colored eyes locking with hers. Velmora's jewel, wrapped in frost and disdain. He turned, cloak sweeping across the polished floor, and took his seat beside his father in the royal hall. The courtiers hushed. The kings of Velmora and Arendor exchanged measured greetings, and the terms of union began to unfold. Yet Kael's attention lingered on Elira. Every flicker of her expression, every subtle shift of her posture spoke volumes. She was not a timid bride. She was a huntress caged in silk, a woman who would not yield easily. As the council droned on about treaties and borders, Kael leaned back in his chair, studying her with a soldier's eye. Attractive, yes, more than attractive, but dangerous. A spark that could ignite or consume. And for the first time, Kael wondered if this marriage would forge peace or unleash a war of hearts far fiercer than any fought with steel.